Welcome back, everyone, to the Guilt-Free Book Club. Thank you so much for joining us for our second semester of Guilt-Free Book Club programming. We're very excited to be reading What Inclusive Instructors Do, Principles and Practices for Excellence in College Teaching by Tracy Addy et al. We're very excited to partner with Wentworth's Equity in Learning group for as part of this programming. So Megan, I know you're part of that group. Want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, I can provide just a bit of background. The Equity and Learning Group is devoted to identifying equity barriers that currently exist and making a plan for reducing them. And specifically, how I got involved is as the professional development aspect of what materials can we create and provide to our community to help reduce those equity barriers. And the solution that sort of has emerged is this framework that we call the GROW framework. It's a collection of 4 practices: grow relationships, reimagine representation, optimize learning through accessibility, and work towards awareness and self-reflection. So yes, it does spell grow, hooray. And as we were reflecting on these 4 practices that we have here, Josh and I realized that the Guilt-Free Book Club is really uniquely positioned to help explore these practices deeper with the reading that we had been considering going into the semester. So this is a crossover event, basically, with the Equity and Learning Group and TLC. It's Guilt-Free Book Club, which does include our Colleges of the Fenway colleagues as well. So we're excited to combine our strengths and have a collaborative conversation about what inclusive instructors do to promote those practices.
And you'll note that each one of our 4 sessions this semester go hand in hand with one of those GROW frameworks. And the first one today's is grow relationships. So I thought it'd be neat to bring in a quick quote from the gentleman who wrote the foreword to this book. Peter Felton has his own book called Relationship Rich Education: How Human Connections Drive Success in College. He was actually the keynote speaker at a Colleges of the Fenway event last semester, through which I was fortunate enough to obtain this book. And it starts off by saying, what single factor makes for an excellent college education? As it turns out, it's pretty simple: human relationships. Decades of research demonstrate the transformative potential and lasting legacies of a relationship-rich college experience. So, the book kind of goes into all that research and everything that shows just how when students have really meaningful relationships with instructors, with other staff and support folks on campus, and also with each other, they feel that sense of belonging, and they're more empowered to succeed and are more likely to succeed and graduate and continue to feel connected to the institution and lifelong learning, etc., as they go on. So we wanted to start off our session today just by doing a go around, and we all know each other obviously, but feel free just to share your name, what you do at the university. We are recording this and we're gonna post it onto our website, and we'd love for you to just think back to some relationship that you had with a professor or with a staff member or with a student. And this could be when you were a student yourself, something, a mentor, someone that really influenced your path, someone that really, took that grow relationships thing seriously and made an impact on your life. Or it could be a student that you've connected with in whatever capacity, whether it's in your current role or some other role as an educator you've held, either in higher ed or some other setting where you felt like, that relationship really stuck with you and you feel the impact of it going forward. And just kind of a nice example of how growing relationships led to an inclusive educational experience that just lives with you going forward. So I'll kick it off. My name is Josh Luckins, and I'm an instructional designer here at Wentworth. And actually, when I was thinking about this, the person that kind of kept popping into my mind was a student that I got to know pretty well when I was actually a student teacher at the Cambridge School of Weston, which is a high school here in Boston. And he was a freshman student, a freshman in high school, and he was from Taiwan. So he actually just moved to the United States. This was partially a boarding school, partially a day school. So he was in the boarding contingent, and it was his first time living in the States. And just as it so happened in my student teaching kind of practicum, the way it worked out, they had a modular kind of calendar where it was these like 6-week intensives, and then it would kind of switch, and you had 3 intensives in that period. And I just happened to be in all 3 of them with him. Like it just happened to be that that was how it was. And one of them I was more actively involved as a teacher, and in another one a little bit in the middle, and another one I was like a little bit more observing. So I kind of had these different roles within those classrooms, but we kind of shared the experience of like, oh, you're in all my classes, you know. And one of them I was a little bit more in that kind of student-y mindset, and another one I was a little bit more of a teacher mindset. So we got to know each other, and he also was involved in an after school kind of theater type activity we were doing together. So I got to know him pretty well in that beginning of that first semester, and because it was his first, you know, big intro to the country and to the school and to everything, it was kind of a formative and very tender time, and also a time to really establish something meaningful. So we really kind of got to know each other in this very lovely way, and I became kind of like an informal like advisor or mentor to him, and we kind of compared notes on different things in different classes. And I remember him making all these surprising and wondrous connections between things we were doing in like a movement theater dance class and like this like science class that was, you know, involved. Humanities was interdisciplinary, but they were seemingly totally disparate and different. And it was like, no, there's all these connections. And I was like, this is brilliant. And I'm so glad I could be here to be that bridge between them, you know, and kind of help out. And I just, you know, by the end of that semester when I left, he was like, wait, you're not like sticking around or whatever. I was like, no. And he was like, oh man, like it's just been incredible to share this, you know, beginning of this school year with you. It just, you kind of helped me, you know, bridge this transition. I'll always remember you. And I was like, yeah, wow, thank you. I'll always remember you too. And, you know, we're not in touch, but it's the kind of thing where just for, you know, that was a number of years ago, and thinking about this prompt, I was like, that's the person who came to my mind. So clearly there's something there that was lasting. So that's my story.
So I can go. I'm Suzanne Edmonds. I'm an instructional designer at Simmons. I also wear a couple other hats. I'm also an adjunct instructor, and I am a course and faculty lead for one of 2 courses that are, we call them the Simmons courses. It's basically from your freshman year to your senior year. You have to take these courses, and it just builds upon one another. So I'm the lead for all that. So that just has all happened this August. So a lot of hats. But prior to coming into higher ed, I was actually an elementary school teacher, and I live and breathe Appalachian State, which is in North Carolina, which is where I'm from. And if you have followed football lately, you know we've had some crazy games. But one of the things that I always did was I would give a homework pass to my students if they won their football games on Saturdays. And so my students would be all about these homework passes. They would say, okay, we're pulling. It was my way of getting them to pull for my team, I'll be honest. But it stuck with some of them so much that was years ago. And when I taught second grade, there's one student of mine who she is now, she's actually a nurse. Yeah, that makes me feel old because she's graduated high school, she's graduated college, and she's living the dream. And she still messages me randomly and says, hey, I saw apps playing. Can I get a homework pass for work? And so just having that connection with those students, and I'm thinking in my mind, that was years and years ago, and you still remember it. So something very, very small, but making those connections and holding on to those students. I mean, it's probably been 14 years. That is crazy to me, but it's also amazing because I must have done something right, because she still reaches out. And it's not just about homework passes, but that's kind of their going joke for us. And so just making sure that I am somehow connecting with all students in that respect. And I still try to do that when I'm doing my adjunct instructor responsibilities, even though I'm completely online, it's still important. So that kind of started the path, and I'm just continuing.
I love that story. And they were just on College Game Day, right? App State, nice. Former professor of mine worked there, and similarly. Anyway, looks beautiful. I'm Ariel. I do know most of you. I am the Director of Student Accessibility Services and Academic Support at Wentworth. what Josh was talking about earlier, is that those are two of the three departments under the Success Studio banner. Which also includes our academic advisors. So that's like the missing piece. And I really like that prompt. And at first I was like, I had too many ideas because I studied American studies and feminist gender and sexuality studies. And we shared a ton about ourselves, like personal is political. That was a very big thing for us. And so there were a lot of classes that I felt like I was, sharing more of my personal life in those classrooms. But what I was really thinking about was that I kind of shared a specific aspect of myself for each of those classes. So like, when I was in a queer studies class, a queer theory class, I was talking about my queer identity. And I was hearkening back to earlier memories and things like that. And when I was in a Jewish cultural history class, I was talking about how I was Jewish and my upbringing in that way. But the space and the person from the school that I most connected with was a space where I was all of myself, which was with our Dean of Accessibility Services, actually. It was so important to me. It led me to going into this role, who really became a mentor to me. And perhaps because it wasn't specific to a class, it was a general meeting. I felt like I could bring all of myself there and we could talk really openly about that. Although technically it was about my, disability identity and disabled identity. But yeah, so that had such a profound influence on me that throughout our work in my senior year, where I super didn't know what I wanted to do, it was our conversations that I said, she was like, I think you'd be good at my job, which was a weird thing to hear as a current student. I couldn't imagine sitting on the other side of the desk in like a few short months at graduation, but it's what came to pass. So really important relationship for me. And also, I think nicely, someone who wasn't my full-time instructor, because I shared a lot of myself with those professors, which was really meaningful, but it was always like through a kind of a narrow lens. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here this semester.
Some kind of connections with students, I think, I don't know, kind of cool. Like, I think, working with like the tutors a lot, like, especially with the tutors, maybe you're working mainly with students that like they're doing, like their GPAs are fine. Like they're, sometimes they're stressed about a class, but like academically, it's not like a lot of the focus is on people that like we want to make sure can persist, can be retained and graduate. But it's kind of cool helping like people like get their like very specific, like academic, what's my goal for college. So it's been cool. Like, I've had a chance to help like a couple of the tutors we've had over the past few years, like, I don't know, apply to grad, like help them with their like grad school application letter. And like, you can really get to know them through the job. And like, you can really you kind of get to know someone when you read their like admission letter. It's part of the idea. So I thought that was cool. And, like, and the one case, like, especially like at Wentworth, or maybe like a lot of times, it's very like career focused. So like the handful that are applying to like grad school or like PhD programs, it's like you're to a greater degree, you're just kind of forging your own path. So it's nice to have that support. And like in the one case, she was, one of them was graduating like during the pandemic. So it was the year the commencement was like postponed a year. And she was actually invited to speak at their like commencement a year after graduation. So like she reached out again to like, could you look over this like commencement speech I put together? And so that was, I don't know, it was a cool progression to see like, as a student applying to grad school and then inviting back and, just offering some feedback on a commencement speech. So I don't know, I think like, it's like a super specific academic goals. It's kind of nice to like be able to, you need that level of human connection to tailor what you're doing to help them out in that way beyond just like, okay, let's help you get an A in this class or whatever.
I'm picking up on a couple of themes here that relate to the two stories that came to mind that I kind of wanted to share. But if you don't know me, I'm Megan Hamilton Giebert. I have a new job title. I am Associate Director of Learning Design Solutions in TLC, which is a mouthful, and I'm getting used to that. And I'm excited to be a part of this book club and to, reflect on this question of how do we grow relationships. And what I'm hearing in some of your stories is not just the connection, but the transformations that occur during the connections of like the different roles that you or the other person find yourself wearing as you grow, as you mature and progress in your careers and in your goals. And the through line of humanity that defines that. And the two things that popped into my head are, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of great supportive faculty and develop good relationships with them. But I remember a graduate school faculty member who was really influential on my professional and my personal growth, just in terms of equity and inclusion, which are now high values for me that I hadn't previously considered until I worked with this instructor. And I grew up in a white conservative Southern town, and I was very accustomed to instructors who looked like me. And so being able to have an instructor who did not and could contribute life experiences that I had never considered before, but also in a way that built the health education case for equity and inclusion, and in realizing that as health educators we can't ignore race, ethnicity, and the factor and the impacts that racism and related isms have on health. And so the transformation that occurred in me because a faculty was able to take time and start both a professional and a personal relationship with me. And the bookending that, I remember when I was in a situation where I was teaching a race, ethnicity, and health course, I tried to teach it in a mindful and in a sensitive and an identity affirming manner. And I don't remember doing one particular thing for a certain student, but I do remember at the end of the semester being really touched when a student came up to me and thanked me, and said they'd really enjoyed this course and learned a lot. And, I hadn't really recognized the impact that I was having on her, but it was just really meaningful. I'd like to think that there was, things that I did influenced by the instructors who taught me that helped another student transform during the process.
I wanted to ask you, it sounds like you got a chance to look at the chapters, and I don't know if anyone else did. If not, no guilt. But if you did, do you have any other reflections, or does anyone have any reflections about what our friends in what Inclusive Instructors Do had to offer?
I thought the tool was really interesting, the Who's in My Class tool. I liked the first chapter. I love a narrative, but seeing like such a tangible metric that you could have on the outset of a class, I thought was really interesting. I had been asked, again, in my liberal artsy, whatever, interdisciplinary major, to do way shorter versions of that, like name, intro, and then when I'm in a full-time, I'm in an online doctorate program, we had been asked to do things like pictures, like that were not formal, like they were like, if you want to include your family, and like trying to get a little bit more of that, who are you outside of being a student in this strategic management class? But it was so comprehensive. So I was really taken by how detailed, how comprehensive, and I think it would go over really well. Because even if a student, I like the notion that like you could modify this, of course, nobody's saying it has to be like direct from the book, but even if a student only shared part of that, that would still be kind of a lot that they were bringing to the table. So even if, some of those things didn't mean anything to them, they never think about their sexuality, and they're never, but they're Pell Grant eligible or first generation or something, that's such a good jumping off point for you to have as an instructor from the beginning of the session. So I really like that, the tool.
So I actually do a tool like this in my class at Simmons. So I got the idea from Sarah Kavanaugh, who I'm sure you're all familiar with her work, but she is our Associate Director for Teaching and Learning at the CFE at Simmons. Again, a mouthful. But we had Tracy Addy come and do a talk for us. And I think she got the idea from her. And so it's a simple Google form that I've created. And it just says, your name, whatever you go by, if it's different than like what's on the roster, pronouns. And then I have options. So like I'm a first generation college student. I work more than 15 hours per week. I'm a caregiver for someone else. And there's a fourth one in there, and I forget what the fourth one is at this moment. And then so they can answer that, and then they can answer like what do they think is a good aspect of online classes, what makes you nervous about this course, to which most of them have replied that it's async, which I find interesting. And then just anything else that they want me to know. The Google form only comes to me. It doesn't go anywhere else. It's just for my information. And I was shocked at how many people actually filled it out. It was optional. They didn't have to, but I would say more than 3/4 of my class filled it out, which was awesome.
That's really cool to hear, because when I was reading that survey, I try to approach things, optimistically yet also skeptically, but I was like, are people actually going to do this? Is it too long? Are people going to feel, more isolated by having to, feeling pressured to disclose this information? But I think if you present the survey in the right way, it actually can be a really affirming thing. So I'm happy to hear that you have some experience to share, that students' response rates are high, and the value of it seems to be embraced by them.
And a connection I was thinking between this and kind of transparency in learning and teaching is like, if you just like throw out this survey of like, tell me about your this, that, and the other, it's like, why are we doing this? Why should I respond to this? But if it's really, stated and framed in a way that's like, here's why I want to get to know you, and here's how I'm going to use it, and here's why it's important, and here's how it can help you, or whatever, like just whatever the real like underlying reasons are, and tying back to making people feel included and belonging, community, all that stuff, then it could kind of serve the purpose more directly, I guess. So yeah, any other thoughts about that, about how we do that, about how we kind of do this thing of like, because the question in the chapter that she poses is just gonna get back to it. It's who are the students in my course? Who are the students in my course? How can I get to know them meaningfully and make sure that they feel seen and supported? And so how else do we do that? How else are folks in this room doing that? Obviously with students in synchronous courses like Cynthia teaches, asynchronous courses like Suzanne teaches, and the tutoring relationships we have in the Success Studio, and even in with TLC we do these kind of workshops. I just did one yesterday with a group of students. It was a one-time thing, but it's important, and it was very impactful for the story of us. So how do we do that? How do we make students feel seen and get to know them in a way that builds that relationship, and it isn't just a one-way form that comes in for us to know about?
Sorry, I have another comment.
Go for it.
So I also do, and this is all new to me, so I'm trying to incorporate as much as I can because it's an async class. And so I sent out just a Google Slides presentation, and it had directions on what to do, and then it had my example. And so I had kind of what you were talking about earlier, Ariel, was when you post pictures, but it could be casual. So there are 3 questions on these slides, and it's your name, what your major is, what other things you have going on this semester, and then a picture. It could be a selfie, it could be something fun, it could be whatever casual. The hard part though is, no, I don't want to say getting students to do it, but getting the buy-in of why to do it. But I will say, for the students who have completed that for me, it's made a huge difference when I respond to their assignments, because that information in those Google Slides, which is just, very simple, helps me frame what I think about when I comment or give them a grade or give them feedback on their assignments, because I have taken the time to read their slides, know what they're doing, see what they're going through, see their Google form, and then kind of apply it all. Is it a lot? Yes. But I feel like in the end, that's what our students need. It's not, it's Josh, it goes back to what you were saying. It's not a one-way street here. You've got to have both ways going. And so it's not only a way for students to get to know each other, it's also a way for me to get to know the students and be able to connect with them.
What do you teach, Suzanne?
So I teach at Simmons. I'm teaching I equate it to like a freshman seminar, but it's for juniors. So they're third years. But they take this course throughout their Simmons career, and it's from freshman to senior year, and it just builds upon each other on the courses. And so there aren't a lot of requirements, if you will. You have to complete these assignments. It's a pass-fail course. So there are a lot of hesitancy on students even doing things on time because technically you can't fail them until the very last day. And so I've tried to change things up to where I can incorporate more connection, more, not just here are your assignments, go do them, but making those, getting to know my students, because that's what I did face to face.
Gotcha. Thank you. I was just curious. Yeah, I think I have it easy because teaching English and the humanities, you really hear a lot through the students' writing. I mean, so for me, the trick would be to speed that up a little bit because, to have it to sort of accelerate the process so that I can know them more quickly. I feel like by the end of the semester, I mean, I know them quite intimately because of the things they've been asked to write about, but I need to figure out how to accelerate that process. And one thing that I found intriguing in the reading was about the values affirmation statements. And I was looking for an example. I didn't really find an example. I found a couple online, but I wondered if people had used values affirmation statements because I do something sort of like that through an in-class exercise that people do anonymously. But I was just wondering, I'd love to beef up my skills in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen or used values affirmation statements, but I do know that with our the equity and learning group's also been working on some inclusive syllabus templates, and I think that the new template kind of does put in a little more room for instructors to define, shared expectations, but also promises to each other that you can kind of make in your classroom, and you can kind of set the stage for the relationships that you're going to grow by letting students know, here's how I'm going to help you, here's how you're going to help the course, and here's what we collectively are going to accomplish and how we're going to support each other to get there. So there's room for that, I think, in the syllabus, and then also in your introductory activities that you were doing. What Suzanne was describing that she has her students do, I feel like I've seen similar, like week 1 introduction discussion forums, pretty common. I come from an online course background, and so that was a standard feature in our online courses is week 1, have some sort of getting to know you activity where students can, self-identify to the class, possibly share images or things that are, meaningful to them. In addition to maybe identifying their goals for the course and what they're most excited about in it.
Yeah, the values thing makes me think of when I used to work at Outward Bound on the first day of the expeditions, we'd always do this thing called the full value contract activity. And if you Google it, there's like a ton of stuff on it, but basically it's like a kind of idea of the group collectively comes up with like what are their collective individual and then shared values as how they want to show up together as a group with each other. And it's at the end of the day, it can be used as like a behavior tool. So because it's not like we have rules, these are the rules, it's like these are the values, and then when something happens we can look back and be like, oh, does what happened line up with like how we wanted to be together? It's like, oh, not necessarily. Okay, how can we modify that? And that's the thing that you do in with younger students a lot also, but it could also be something that's like spark a deeper conversation about like what does it mean to be in community, or how do we want to show up for each other as a community of inquiry, or as, you know, researchers, or as colleagues, or whatever it might be. So I think there is a value to bringing in those types of deeper things that we all believe. And it also makes me think of this other thing that is from more political science. When I used to do also these kind of model diplomacy simulation work and negotiations. And there was something where they would always ask people to step back, especially when there was a contentious negotiation. At like, basically on the surface, there's positions of, you know, like, I believe this and you believe that, and we're at odds. But at a deeper level, there's interests and values, and oftentimes there's a lot of shared values and shared interests that the two parties or multiple parties might have, that even though the positions are at odds, if they can figure out the areas where they do have common ground, then they can be like, oh, I see that you're coming at this from the same place as I am, with a good heart and with the intention of having us all, you know, have a better society. But you kind of see that it would, your like actual policy prescription is in opposition. But so how could we kind of like find the common ground by looking, instead of just at the surface level positions, at the underlying interests and values? So that's just another way that I kind of like resonated with this notion of having students think more deeply and connect more deeply in that way, and how that might help them, you know, deepen the discourse and find more connections between one another.
I'm not sure if I'm necessarily endorsing this, but I have a memory from the same professor who then worked at App State, which is that on the first day, this was a graduate higher ed admin program. She gave us these scenarios nicely. It was, you know, everyone had like gender neutral names, so you could really see yourself in the scenarios. Broke us down into groups to discuss what we would do. And then when it ended, when every group gave their feedback from the different scenarios, she told us that those are all things that happened to her. And it was very interesting, not as like a gotcha moment, you know, but it was that was the first class. And then it was like, oh my gosh, like she had shared, we didn't really realize that she was sharing so much of herself with us until that ended. But I think it set the tone of, you know, coming from a place of experience and sort of like this guilt-free book club to be really judgment-free. Because we didn't know, like, nobody was doing like this is the instructor, so you have to say, you know what I mean? Like we didn't know. And again, it wasn't meant to like manipulate us or trick us, but it was a really interesting way to model what, you know, I think was one of her expectations of us in the first class. But again, it was a little weird that she didn't like share it. It does feel different than like Josh, what you just described with your Outward Bound experience, but it stuck with me. That's like another thing to think about. It's like, I haven't forgotten that, and I can't remember the first day of a ton of classes that I've taken. So anyway,
it sounds like it added an unexpected authenticity.
It
to it.
sure did. It sure did.
That's
Yeah, and because the students in sharing what they would do, a lot of times said, oh, like I remember this very well. She was a first generation student. And one of the things was about and low income, joining a sorority and not realizing that to place a bid or pledge or something. I'm sorry for people who know Greek life. She didn't know that there would be like dues as well. Like she didn't know that would be there. And so she thought she couldn't join Greek life because of, you know, financial. So when somebody was giving their example, they said, you know, I too had this issue. And then it was her, it was the professor. And it was, they had forged a connection kind of before they knew it. Yeah. It's interesting.
I was thinking about some of these things in regard to what Suzanne was talking about, of like the students like don't necessarily have the extrinsic motivation because this pass fail, whatever, but how can we build in structures that cause them to be more intrinsically motivated? And I think that one of those possible structures has to do with relationships and just having students feel accountable to one another, and not just accountable, but connected to one another and wanting to show up to be, part of the thing that allows them to build these relationships and, continue them and feel more connected to each other and the campus community. So I'm just thinking about kind of like the way we structure our educational offerings, whether they're online and it's like there's these Google Slides that everybody can participate in and get to know each other with, or whether it's in person and there's icebreakers we do and there's things that are shared and things that are a little theatrical, a little bit of a surprise at the end that like are like, oh wow, or very authentic. There's a sharing that the professor models in something, and then everyone's like, wow, that was so genuine and real. That came from the heart, so that hits my heart because that was so real. I could feel that. So just ways that we can kind of structure our educational experiences to build in more moments of connection and more moments of students collaborating and sharing ideas, whether it's using technological tools or whether it's just in person or old-fashioned paper, poster paper. But I think that kind of ties back into how what inclusive instructors do, kind of high-level principles, or can kind of trickle down into more like classroom practices that everyone can adopt in their own setting, whether you're, as I did yesterday, leading a workshop, and it's kind of, finding a way that those participants can really be seen and heard and share their stories, or it's, in an online setting. So yeah, any other thoughts about these, what we've been talking about with inclusivity principles and practices, or building relationships with students, and what you've seen done either as a student or what you do in your current role to kind of foster that type of community, that type of learning community?
I liked what you said about like motivation, and I think like thinking about ways where it can, kind of when it's framed as like you're just like own individual learning, like your motivation is just tied to like, how do I get to a result? When you've, in whatever ways you can, which I think is hard to kind of, it's more of like a collective thing. Like the goal is for like the class as a whole to do well, like just things like, like when you give like a in-class assignment, like the ones that finish first, like the temptation for them is just go on their phone or something and like chill until like the activity's done. And so when it's encouraged to like, if you finish early, help the person next to you, like it's a bit, it's a bit more motivating to like stay involved. And then it's to like, you can kind of invoke a bit of like a golden rule there where it's like, well, if someone else finished before you, you probably appreciate like the help. And so, I think if you're going to have any like kind of intrinsic kind of motivating factor, maybe it is like opportunity to help others rather than some, I don't know, like you should do this because I'm saying so type thing, or I don't know.
So one of the things I've noticed is the things that I have mentioned today are not required for my students to do. They're optional. And then in addition to that, because it's kind of almost like a career prep path that we're working on with this course, there are bonus assignments that they can complete. And so one of the discussion forums that I had at the beginning of the course was which, because there's choices. So there's choices of assignments, and then there's like 4 options, and they have to pick one for 3 different assignments. And then there's bonus assignments for some of the modules. And so I basically just commented and said, or made a discussion forum that said, just tell me what you're planning on working on. You don't have to stick with it, but tell me what you're planning on working on and why, and how this is going to help you later in life. And more often than not, students A, responded, and B, choosing to do the bonus assignments. I get that may change based on what may happen this semester, but it's been my experience so far, because I taught this class last semester and it did not go this well at all. I didn't add in all this other optional stuff. So it's kind of interesting to compare the two. I also had 10 students last semester. This semester I have 25. Maybe that's changed too. But it's interesting to me to see how many optional items people either complete, like discussion forums, like the introduction, the Google form, versus oh, well, I have to do this. That's just how it is. That's life. It's interesting to me to have that as optional and see that they're actually completing things.
Yeah, that's surprising and insightful for me to hear, because in my experience, when you have a course design and you may have a set number of points and students need to accumulate points in order to pass, why would they do anything extra that's not worth points? And so that's kind of the points trap, basically, that we can set up. But by creating assignments that have their own value and that students have buy-in to that value and opt into completing it because it's going to, they recognize the value in it, that it's going to help their learning, help their growth. That's when you've got a winning combination there in terms of structuring the why it's important to do this and the how it'll help you. That's really meaningful, encouraging.
So yeah, I love that idea, and I'm going to think more about that. I did something in class that I think is going to be really helpful in creating that sense of belonging that you were asking about, Josh. How do we go about creating that spirit of that commitment or to each other? And so I did this thing that was anonymous. I decided to let students contribute anonymously to a Google Docs. I mean, it was quiet, right? There were no voices speaking. It was all going up on a Google Doc, and we were watching it kind of unfurl. There was a lot of me speaking.
It sounds like what you did was engaging, even if you weren't hearing voices in the room. You were still having the voices in the room represented in a text form. And I've thought of a similar tool are like word clouds. I've seen those used sometimes as an interactive tool in the classroom, and that's another way to put people's thoughts onto a screen in an anonymous public way. I think Menti is a tool where you can create word clouds to kind of create a similar experience.
And I would say so first of all, I just think it's fascinating that the aesthetics of that experience were so contemporary. Like, you're in this space that's like, it's still being held and it's still together, but the interaction is through this like text-based thing. So I just think that's very interesting. I know that you personally, Cynthia, like are interested in aesthetics and like that kind of critique of modernity, and that could be something to bring in also to the discussion, because I think that's just fascinating and kind of metacognitively. But also I was just thinking that another way to like take that meaning making further via a similar tool would be some sort of like a mind mapping or concept mapping exercise, maybe in small groups, where they have to take that giant Google Docs discussion thread, of all these different people's chats anonymously, and kind of separate it out into themes and, bubble out, okay, what are the main themes emerging? What are some key quotes from this? How do they connect to one another? What are the relationships, and how does it maybe connect back to the original text? And so to kind of place them in conversation with one another via a visual medium that also is kind of a contemporary thing. So I don't know, I think there's so many ways to go with it, and I just want to just send you so much kudos, because it's like, yeah, that it's maybe it's the opposite or whatever of the values affirmation thing, but you've structured in implicitly, it's not as an explicit thing, but implicitly you've structured in a way for the students to be in relationship and have that inclusivity through the medium of the anonymous text or whatever it might be. So I just think that's awesome. And as we wrap up, I just want to put in another pitch Megan had put in the chat. The collaborative notes document. Ariel and myself have already thrown in some takeaways, but if you all want to take a minute either now or as you wrap up, just to throw in some sort of takeaway of something that you would consider, bringing forward or trying in your context, that's always fun to do, just to kind of wrap up. And since Ariel, you've already done that, would you be willing to share what it was that you want to bring forward?
So we currently have, and again, this is a little bit different than the classroom space and an instruction space, but for students who want to get started with our office and maybe seeking out accommodations, there's an accommodation request form that they fill out. And right now it has pretty basic demographic information. I was very pleased that we put pronouns there and that like for that to feel like a big deal. But in seeing the metric, I think there's an opportunity because it is kind of like intake. It's at the start of the relationship to have more totally optional information. And if a student chooses to add a little bit more about themselves, I feel like that really could inform the conversation we have. Because right now, other than their like class year and disability information, the only other like interesting context we get is if they've ever had accommodations before. So that's usually a starting off point, a jumping off point for conversation. Oh, you have, and it was good. Let's talk about what worked, or you haven't, and here's why, perhaps. Because sometimes we'll get that, but I feel very inspired to add a little bit more. I have that kind of power. I can change what that form looks like today. I think I'm glad to be having this conversation so close to the start of the semester, because this is something we can just like implement. Like I said, can implement it in September and see if people start filling it out. If they still go kind of unused, maybe we won't keep them. But yeah, I was thinking that.
Thank you. And the one I put in, I want to make sure to give credit to Tom, because I thought of it when you were sharing your idea of really just moments of peer instruction and structuring in moments where students can teach each other, and how that does tap into intrinsic motivation of, feeling accountable to one another, and also the desire to help each other. And then it helps learners because they get to be teachers and crystallize their thinking, and also helps novice learners to hear from another novice learner who's just come to an understanding of it in addition to a professor explaining it. So that was one takeaway that I'm bringing forward. And as we wrap up, does anyone else have anything else that jumps out to them or comes to mind as something? This is, by the way, on page 2 of the shared Google Doc, if you want to follow along or add yours. Anything else that anyone comes to mind as we wrap up our session this afternoon?
I'm just so excited about this. I really look forward to the next one. It's refreshing and important.
I'm so glad to hear it, and so glad y'all are able to join us today. I have 2 wrap-up thoughts, but I want Tom to go first because you unmuted.
Oh, I just want to say, I mean, it's kind of funny, like we led us off talking about like the value of like personal connection, and that's like, I don't know, it's like a big thing I get out of these. It's just like, it's a really nice way to like connect with you all. So it's like, oh yeah, like the faculty staff connection is also really valuable, I think. And I think it certainly helps us help students when we know each other better.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it. Anyone else before I jump in with mine? Okay, well, the 2 things I was going to say, one is practical. Ariel, if you are interested in revising the Who's in Class survey, as part of this lead up to this, I wondered if it'd be helpful to create a version of the Chapter 6 survey in Qualtrics. So if you'd like to use that as a head start, I put the preview link in the collaborative notes doc. If you like it and it'll be helpful, I can give you collaborating access so you can copy it and make it your own.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to. Anyone's welcome to use that. I'm not sure how useful it is to make the survey live, but if you want collaborative access so you can copy it and manipulate, I'm happy to make that happen. And the only other thing I wanted to share is, Suzanne, when you mentioned App State earlier, I'm a Furman grad, and so I hate your school so much.
The feeling is mutual. We hate yours too.
All right, good.
The one thing I have to say about Furman is go for 2. That was Miracle on the Mountain Part 1. Miracle on the Mountain Part 2 just happened Saturday.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is great and terrible.
You have shared values though.
We do. There we go. We found something to connect over.
Mutual hate. I mean,
Yeah, mutual hate. And deep appreciation and love for your alma mater.
but respect for each other.
Yeah, mutual Southern college football.
I
Connection.
love that.
That's amazing. I love that.
Makes me so
Yeah,
happy.
Ariel, I'm so glad you brought that back in. It was like just it really tied it all together. That was beautiful. Yeah, and I just feel I agree so much with everyone. Just how it's wonderful to connect and be reminded of all the ways in which we're, all working towards the same goals and all doing all these fascinating things. And speaking of which, I would love to hear, Cynthia, about how your Olmsted course is going because it seems so exciting.
Talk. Yeah,
And yeah, so sometime we'll have to get it together, and that would be wonderful because it seems like such a wonderful course. Um, but I
great.
know it is one, and people have probably places to be. So thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to use the collaborative notes to add your takeaways if you'd like to. And also, I'm happy to hang out for a couple minutes if anyone wants to stay on and continue chatting as we kind of officially wrap up our first session of the Guilt-Free Book Club. See you all next month in October for part 2.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.